Okay, so let's start the webinar. And today we're going to I'm going to be joined by Jack Zenger. Jack is the co-founder and the CEO of Zenger Folkman, and myself. I'll be here also. Also, Kayla Burnett, she will be doing she's our chat host today, and we're excited to have them with us and for Kayla and Jack to be here with us today. As we start here today, I want to talk to you a little bit about Zenger Folkman. Um, One of the things that happens when you want to start a consulting firm or a training and development firm is most people have a theory, and they sort of build that firm around the theory. Well, we started a different way. What we had is data. We had data from 25 years of collecting data on 360 assessments. And so rather than start with a theory, we started looking at the data and said, what does the data tell us about what leaders do and what makes them great, and what do extraordinary leaders do? And based on that, we came to a great conclusion, an interesting conclusion in our research. And what we found is that when we looked at the best leaders, we found the thing that differentiated them was the best leaders had a few profound strengths. In fact, we found if a leader just did one thing incredibly well, their average effectiveness was at the 64th percentile. If they didn't have any strengths, they were at the 34th percentile. So we found that really when most people look at 360 and 360 results, the vast majority of people, what they do is they look at the data and they identify their weakest area, and that's the thing that they're going to work on. And we discovered that 80% of the time, that's the wrong approach. The best approach is to work on your strengths and developing your strengths. And so that stands out for us. If you look at us and what our research, you can find out more about that. A new insight that we've been thinking about lately is around leadership contagion. What we found is that there's a very interesting effect that happens when leaders are great. We found that their direct reports are significantly better than people that work with a poor leader. And so we called this the trickle-down effect, that leadership trickles down. And what we found is that as we did more data analysis, we found that as leaders improved, their effectiveness went up significantly from one year to the next. And over time, we found that organizations that continued to assess with 360 and do 360, the overall leadership effectiveness of that firm rose every year. So let's start the webinar and let's get going here. Let me start with this picture. And as you look at the picture, think about a summer afternoon in Oakland, California. The stadium is buzzing, the sun is beating down, and Denzel Clark, an outfielder for the A's, is tracking a baseball that's soaring towards the outfield wall. The crowd rises with the ball. Everyone's thinking, it's gone, but Clark isn't ready to give up. He sprints to the warning track, leaps up high as physics will let him, and with one hand on the top of the wall, he leverages himself to hang there and catch that ball. It's sort of like a Marvel movie. The glove stretched out over the wall, he plucks it out of the air, and he drops back to the field with the ball in the glove, and the stadium erupts. Now, up to that moment, most fans don't know his name, but after it, it was everywhere. Replayed on SportsCenter, trending on social media, labeled the catch of the year. In 10 seconds, he went from a relatively unknown player to unforgettable. What can you do as a leader to become unforgettable? And that's the kind of the thing that we want to talk about today. What we did to understand this data was we went to our database. We looked at a database of 63,526 leaders who had been assessed by an average of 13 raters, manager, peers, direct reports, and others. We looked at the bottom 10%, those worst leaders, and then at the top 10%, the best leaders. And we found these individual behaviors, these individual actions that leaders could do to really stand out, to really differentiate themselves. And what we know about these 10 behaviors is if you do them well, they are incredibly noticeable. People will notice what you did and they'll be able to see them, and it's going to have a profound effect. So as we go through the process here, what we'd like to do is talk about these 10 traits, and would like you to listen for something to add to your leadership approach. Now, here's the good news. You don't need to be great at all 10 of these behaviors. In fact, if you do just one well, it's going to raise your overall leadership effectiveness to the 70th percentile, and two will raise it to the 80th percentile. So we're going to talk about these 10 different behaviors, and we'd invite you to identify one or two that you might be able to work on. We're going to try to give you some stories and some examples about those behaviors. So let's start with number one. So number one is creating this atmosphere of continual improvement. Now, exceptional leaders have a growth mindset. And this idea of a growth mindset is something that was popularized by Carol Dweck. Carol Dweck wrote a wonderful paper and some books, and she talked about this growth mindset. And the opposite of a growth mindset is a fixed mindset. So a growth mindset is a mindset that people believe that they can grow and they can learn and they can improve. A fixed mindset is the assumption that people cannot change. This was Sigmund Freud's battle cry. He believed that people were fixed at 6. But we think this growth mindset is really, I think, a significant issue and something that we see in leaders. As we assess leadership effectiveness and engagement, what we find is in direct reports, they really want to learn and grow and develop as they're in the organization. And organizations that don't offer development activities get very negative marks because of this, but leaders do too. Recently, I had the opportunity to meet with one of my old professors, Bruce Brown. Bruce is a really amazing statistician. He can take a data set and analyze it in minutes and really do a really fascinating analysis. He was a mentor to me. And one of the things I realized when I met with Bruce is the thing that makes him realize that he's had a successful career isn't always either the articles that he's written or the books that he's written or the accolades he's gotten from teaching, but it's what his students have done. The fact that I'd been successful makes Bruce feel better. And you know, a lot of times professors that, you know, really you feel satisfied with their career, it's knowing that they've helped their students to be successful. Managers are the same. And I remember some really great managers that influenced me and had a significant influence over me. One of those was Mike Peel. Now, Mike wasn't my manager. He was actually a client. But Mike worked at PepsiCo and then General Mills. And he really was a great mentor. He gave me some great advice. He went on to Yale University, where I worked with him there. And he'd done that. And you know, As you think about the people in that you've worked with, the people that you've really helped develop, that's a really signal that you've been an effective manager and successful. One of the best leaders that I've ever worked for is this guy by the name of Jack Zenger. Now, Jack, I interact with him almost every day. He's been such a great mentor to me. So, Jack, you've had a successful career because I was successful. Thank you. Let's go on to number two.
Okay, number two is that I think most of us recognize that the days of command and control are long gone, and that what people want in their work is to be inspired, and that the most effective leaders are those who are able to inspire and energize those who work around them. Many of you have heard of a man named Ernest Shackleton, who years ago led a very harrowing expedition to Antarctica. A brief ad was purportedly placed in the newspapers that read, and I quote, "Men wanted for hazardous journey, low wages, bitter cold, long hours of complete darkness, safe return doubtful, honor and respect in case of success." And miraculously, dozens of people applied to join this expedition. And you kind of scratch your head and you say, why was that? Was it because Shackleton was such a revered leader? Well, at that time, he really wasn't. But what was fascinating is it was the mission. It was the work that they were being asked to participate in that was so inspiring. And so one of the things that our research has really confirmed is that the most effective leaders are able to help the people that join with them understand the beauty and the majesty of the work that they're doing. And that's what brings about this inspiring kind of context in which they work. Joe?
It's a wonderful trait. The third thing is making decisions under pressure. You know, what's interesting about our current situation is we've never had so much information. We've never had so much data. We have so much data that, instead of helping us make decisions, it's keeping people from making decisions. So many times managers are lost in the data and they can't make a decision. They can't move forward. They're sort of going back and forth and they're stumbling back and forth. Managers that make decisions under pressure, that don't hesitate, that use sound judgment, but take action and move forward, that is a memorable thing. And if you're one of those leaders that's sort of sitting there and you can't make a decision, you're going to fail. Yesterday, I was actually on the freeway. My wife and I were both on the freeway. We drove our daughter to the airport for an early flight. It was 7 a.m. in the morning, and the traffic was absolutely stopped. And my wife was right behind me. And as is my tendency, I saw a lane open up. So I got over and then I got over to another lane and then I went back to another lane and then I came back and my wife, as she does, stayed in the same lane. Guess who got home first? She did. And that's feels like a lot of what some people are doing today. They're switching lanes, but they're not making progress, and you can't tell which lane is faster. Good leaders make decision under pressure, they get things done, they move forward. Doing that can have a significant impact on your effectiveness as a leader.
All right. The fourth thing our research identified was this ability for leaders to help people understand their responsibility and to take the initiative on challenging assignments. The leader is constantly looking for what needs fixing, the new product, a better process, improved marketing, changing our sales approach. Uh, he or she understands that people prefer to be inspired rather than to be told what to do. Uh, my wife and I have been really intrigued of late to watch some wonderful documentaries on the James Webb Telescope. This $10 billion 20-year project presented just enormous technical challenges. They were building a mirror that would be 30 feet in diameter, but had to be folded up and stuffed inside of a rocket. They created a heat shield and a reflecting film that would collect light that would be the size of a tennis court when it was unfolded in space. And all this needed to be folded up and launched via a rocket. The chief engineer estimated that there were 300 points of failure in this project. And what they did was to have various people on their team take responsibility for making sure that that point of failure didn't occur and didn't scuttle the entire James Webb project. And it's been a very interesting example of how the most effective leaders help the people that they work with to be willing to be accountable and to take initiative to make an important thing happen. Joe?
So the fifth issue that we identified was providing clear direction and purpose. Outstanding leaders are clear about where we're going, how we're going to get there, and what's going on in the organization. Now, several years ago, I was with a colleague. I remember standing, waiting for the CEO to invite us into his office. We were at PepsiCo, and I had done some research on turnover, what causes people to leave, and the impact of certain things on people. And as we're standing talking to each other in the office, my colleague says to me, "You watch, he'll talk about the strategy." And I said, "We're not talking about the strategy. We're talking about turnover." And I couldn't imagine how he'd start talking about the strategy. But I said, "Why do you think he's going to talk about the strategy?" And he said, "He always does." He always does. So we go into the office. We're in the office. I'm presenting the data for about 10 minutes. And after 10 minutes, the CEO starts talking about the data we presented and connecting it to the strategy of PepsiCo. And I talked to my colleague after, and I said, "He did it. He talked about it." Yeah. And he said, "Yes, he's a broken record. He always talks about the strategy." So many of your people are lost in the wilderness. They don't know why they're doing what they're doing. They're lost in the wilderness. And if you can come along and you can help them understand the impact they have and how that's connected to the mission of the organization, that helps them and it gives them motivation to do better work and do it today. Now, some organizations have a yearly meeting where they talk about the strategy. Guess what? That's not enough. Monthly overviews, not enough. Leaders need to talk about this all the time, and they need to help people connect what they're doing to the strategy and purpose of the company. People that do that, leaders that do that, help people see why we're going in this direction and what difference it's going to make. Be that kind of leader, and it'll make a big difference from you. Jack?
The sixth thing we identified in our research was that the most effective leaders are really good at walking the talk and serving as a role model. Too many leaders assume organizational rules don't apply to them and they create double standards and rationalize their behavior. The standout leaders do just the opposite. They consistently model the behavior that they expect. Early in my career, I worked for a large financial institution in Southern California, and I saw a bad example of this. We had a senior executive who was, he stood out for his being a really natty dresser and always well groomed. And it was well known in the organization that when he traveled, he not only stayed at the best hotels and most expensive hotels, but that he would send a bundle of shirts to the hotel in advance, have them washed and ironed and starched to his specifications. And then on frequent occasions, he would give lectures to the assembled managerial group about the importance of being frugal and about the importance of using company money very responsibly. And needless to say, there were lots of rolled eyes and lots of smirks because he did not live by the same standard he was asking the rest to live by. On the other hand, I was also in a meeting where a brand new VP of sales was being introduced. And he was rather immediately peppered with questions by some of the people in the group. They were asking questions about how they could use the company cars and how much they could spend in entertaining a client could they buy them drinks? Could they buy them dinner? And finally, after a few minutes of this, he smiled and said, look, let me propose two things. One is use good common sense. And secondly, let me say, do anything you see me do. And I've thought to myself frequently about that. How many leaders could, with conviction and with comfort, kind of stand before their assembled leadership team and say, do anything you see me do? Joe?
Let's talk about the seventh issue, which is building trust through good judgment. Now, a couple of years ago, I wrote a book on trust, and I found that trust really comes from these three dimensions: relationships, the extent to which you have positive relationships with other people; consistency, and that Jack just talked about that, what I say, I do; and the third one is expertise. What was interesting about our research on trust is that all three needed to be in the equation. If you just did two of them well, it didn't help. And I came up with an interesting story in the book on this problem when people aren't viewed as having expertise. And this is by a fellow by the name of Wag Dodge. Now, Wag Dodge was a firefighter. And here's a story about him. One sweltering day in 1949, a lightning bolt set a grassy highland in Man Gulch River Valley in Montana on fire. Led by 9-year veteran Wag Dodge, a group of smoke jumpers were dispatched to the battle of the growing fire. The conditions were bad, and with no radio or map of the terrain, the men were all alone. Now, Wag Dodge had 9 years of experience. He had fought many, many fires. But in this particular situation, he was newly given this group of men that didn't know him very well at all. But as the evening sun started to set, the conditions worsened, with the fire shifting and causing an inferno that was headed straight towards the men. The flames were now 200 feet high and 300 feet deep, moving at 30 miles an hour. Dodge frantically commanded the men to fall back and get rid of their heavy backpacks, but the fire was moving too fast to outrun it. Dodge had fought enough fires to know this fact, and this is why he stopped running and tried to get the other 15 men to do the same thing. His cries for them to stand still were ignored as they continued running in frantic paths up the hill. They were desperate to escape and unsure of Dodge's strange instructions to stop. In a moment of pure inspiration, Dodge had come up with a plan. He quickly lit a match and ignited the ground in front of him. He watched as those flames raced away from him up the canyon walls. When Dodge stepped into the ashes of his smaller fire, he was surrounded by a thin buffer of burnt land. He lay down on the still smoldering embers, wet his handkerchief with some water from his canteen, and clutched it to his mouth. He closed his eyes tight and inhaled a thin ether of oxygen that remained near the ground. Then he waited for the fire to pass over him. After several terrifying minutes, Dodge emerged from the ashes virtually unscathed. But 13 of the men with him died in that fire. Two were able to escape. They hid in some rocks. That's a very sad story, and then it happens when people don't have trust. And because of those three elements, relationships, consistency, and expertise. If you have trust, you're going to be successful. And you can leverage that in many, many ways. So decide and look for the indications that your people trust you and there's a high level of trust in your organization.
The eighth thing our research found was that the most effective leaders, the ones that are memorable, were those that were able to kind of keep a strong focus on the highest priority goals. As one of my friends used to say, the main thing is to make the main thing the main thing. We've seen a very interesting story play out of late. It has to do with a company that I sort of watched grow. In Silicon Valley, I happened to be there as Andy Grove and Gordon Moore and Bob Noyce founded Intel. After a very few years being in the semiconductor manufacturing business, these three individuals one day had a very gut-wrenching conversation where they said, the future is going to be the manufacture of more complex chips that really run, able to kind of do processing at a high speed. And it's not in the semiconductor business. And so they totally abandoned making semiconductors. They bet the company on being at the forefront of where technology was headed. And now, a number of years later, we see Intel in trouble. And the reason why, it seems, maybe the major reason why, is that they didn't stay out in front of where technology was headed. When the market shifted away from personal computers and as being the dominant force, they had assumed that that would be their bread and butter for almost forever. And now came along smartphones and artificial intelligence. It required a different kind of chip, a different kind of a processor. And so what happened was that they didn't keep focused on the most important issue, which was to be out in front of the technology that was driving this entire industry. And so I think that the great lesson for all of us is what's most important in your company, in your industry for its long-term future, and make sure that you as a leader keep focused on that unfailingly. Joe?
Yeah, it's always fascinating how when everything's a priority, nothing is a priority, right? Um, the next issue that we found that really differentiated great leaders was achieving results through cooperation. Several years ago, one of my sons came to me and he said, Dad, I'll be a better kid if you get me a dog. Now, we'd never had a dog, and my wife's allergic. And so we had resisted that, but the possibility of him being a better kid, I couldn't resist it. So I said, "All right, get a dog." And he decided on the dog because it needed to be outside. He decided that the best dog for us was a Siberian Husky. Now, I don't really know much about dogs, but I imagine myself taking that dog for a walk and it prancing by my side. That doesn't happen with a husky. Whatever speed you're going, the dog will go faster. I imagine going to the park and throwing the frisbee and the dog going to get the frisbee and bringing it back. That never happens with a husky because if you take them off their leash, he'll go get the frisbee, he'll pick it up, he'll wag it at you, and then he'll run away. You can never take them off their leash. The third thing I imagined was us sitting in the TV room watching a movie and him curled up at my feet. When we did that, he just chewed on the furniture. I didn't know what to do with this dog. It was so confusing to me, and I was very frustrated with the dog. And then, by chance, a friend of ours decided to create a dog sled team, and he was interested in Kessler. That's the dog's name. And so he said, "Does Kessler want to be on my dog sled team?" And I said, "Absolutely, he does." You know, what's interesting is my dumb dog, when he became part of a dog sled team, he was a genius. That dog sled team, they were in sync with each other. They could pull a sled for 20 miles. They had so much energy and so much enthusiasm. He just loved being part of that team. Have you ever been in that part of a team? Have you ever been in a team where you loved coming to work, where it was just fun to be there, where everybody had a lot of energy and enthusiasm, where everybody supported each other? You ever been on that kind of a team? You ever been on a team from hell where there was a lot of conflict and disagreements and people were fighting each other and there was no cooperation? You know, the difference is so measurable and the difference is so significant. If you can build that kind of team, that team that people want to be on, that team that people love being part of, you're going to have success. And that's a memory. That's such a great memory because those kind of teams really make a difference and have an impact. So build a team you want to be on. Next thing, Jack.
Yeah, the final thing that our research identified that memorable leaders do is that they're able to inspire people to stretch for goals that were far beyond what they had ever imagined or realized. Um, as a young boy, I used to occasionally order things and I was contemplating and understanding that it was going to be days and often weeks before this would ever come to me in the mail. I'd never in my wildest imagination dreamed that I could go online and with one click order something and have that item delivered to me the next day. And yet that is what Amazon has accomplished. And Amazon's accomplished that by being absolutely riveted on having the best customer experience. To make that happen has required enormous work on supply chain management, creation of local warehouses, new delivery systems, and very sophisticated computer systems. But it's because the leaders in Amazon saw the possibility and encouraged their organization to reach for a goal that was far beyond what anybody would naturally imagine. I'm told that there are parts of the United States today where if you order a product early in the morning, it can be delivered to you in the afternoon. That ability to see a goal and to have people that work with you sign up and adopt and support the achievement of that goal is what the most effective, what the most memorable leaders are capable of doing.
Yeah, it's such a great example. And, you typically find when uh, leaders set a stretch goal and ask their people to do something that feels impossible, when they do it, their engagement goes up, their satisfaction goes up, and they become some of the most satisfied and happy campers that you can think of. So, you know, just as Denzel Clark's spectacular catch and Simone Biles' Olympic feats created unforgettable moments, exceptional leadership behaviors leave indelible marks on organizations and the people within them. The difference is that while athletic brilliance often happens in a single moment, standout leadership is built day by day through deliberate action. Still, it's not just consistency that creates impact. Think back to Intel's bold decision to leave the memory chip business and invest in microprocessors, or Johnson Johnson's unprecedented move to recall Tylenol during a crisis. These were moments of courageous leadership that defined reputations. These weren't just well-executed decisions, they were defining actions rooted in trust, judgment, and a willingness to lead under pressure. In that sense, the steady Eddie leader may earn respect, but it's often the bold and courageous ones that rise to the occasion and take initiative in challenging times and inspire others to stretch beyond their limits who are really remembered the most. So, as I told you before, this is the effect of doing one behavior, two behaviors, three behaviors, four, five well. And as you see, as you kind of can, if you could do five of these well, you'd be at the 91st percentile. But just one well gives you the 70th, two gives you the 80th. So we'd invite you to think about these behaviors, to identify one that you could be great at and take some actions to improve it. And a closing quote here is: the key to successful leadership today is influence, not authority. And that's by our good friend, Ken Blanchard. So Kayla, tell us about our offer that we have for folks on the webinar today.
Yeah, so throughout the year, we here at Zenger Folkman have live online public sessions of our Extraordinary Leader Development Experience. So if you are interested in attending, you can see upcoming dates on our events page at zengerfolkman.com. If you are a new customer, you can reach someone in sales like myself or any of our other territory client executives, and we can give you a discount code to attend. And also, we would love your feedback. So if you could, there is a link to a survey in the chat box. There's also going to be a survey launch as we conclude the webinar. We would really love if you could fill that out for us and just give us some thoughts on your experience with us today. And thank you
Thanks
guys
so
for coming.
much.